I don't want no oil, a spoil in my shoreline. I like fish much better than crud. I like birds and things, a-creeping and crawling. Won't trade no more oil for blood. The sun done give us all we need to make this country run. But that black demon oil's got us fussing and fighting, and I do believe it's time we was done. I don't want them nukes run by them kooks who think radioactivity is fun. No more three-headed frogs or kids with leukemia. Nuclear power ain't fit for a dog. The sun done give us all we need to make this country run. But that nuclear power's got us fussing and fighting, and I do believe it's time we was done. No nukes!
Good morning, Toledo, and good afternoon, Columbus, and good morning, Bowling Green, and hello to everyone on the internet, wherever and whenever you are. My name is Joe DeMare, and I am here with my enthusiastic co-host,
Rebecca Wood.
Yes. And together, Rebecca and I are going to bring you a wonderful hour of radio called For a Green Future. For a Green Future is a show where we talk about ecology and the environment. And we talk about it in the ways that it affects you, your wealth, your health, your happiness, the wealth and health and happiness of the little bugs that are finally waking up, and the worms in the ground, and the birds that eat them, and the cats that eat the birds, and pretty much everybody and everything, because, like it or not, we're all together here on this incredible planet called Earth. And speaking of Earth, happy Earth Day, since tomorrow is Earth Day, April 22nd. And we'll be celebrating at my house. We have an annual Earth Day party there, which should be a good time. But there's, of course, a lot going on that's sort of anti-Earth. We'll get to that in a bit. We're going to just chat for the next, 10, maybe 15 minutes or so. And you're welcome to call in at any time at 877-909-1007. That's 877-909-1007. Then we're going to have an interview, kind of a fun interview this week, with Zeb Albert, who is with the Wood County Park District, and they're talking about their annual native plant sale. So we're going to talk a little bit about native plants and why it's better to use those in your yard and your landscaping than all those foreign plants. Then after that, we hear from our advertisers and patrons, without whom this show would not be possible. And then Rebecca. And what will you be talking to us about, Rebecca?
In honor of National Jelly Bean Day coming up on Monday, I will be talking about carnauba wax.
Carnauba wax,
yes.
Interesting. And
if you like that kind of thing.
Interesting that Jelly Bean Day comes on Earth Day this year.
Yeah.
Interesting coincidence.
And the end of Passover.
Yeah. Wow. Okay. Then it will be Ecological News, and we're adding a new segment to Ecological News this week. I'm calling it Meme Busting, so something to look forward to. And of course, we always look forward to hearing from you at 877-909-1007. So, big thing I wanted to talk about this past week that happened to me was that over there in Benton Harbor, Michigan, the Nuclear Regulatory Commission had a public meeting. It wasn't a hearing, it was a meeting on the plan, the idea of reopening the closed Palisades nuclear plant. And of course, we have been covering this story from the beginning, from the celebratory day when they finally closed the plant back in 2022, and now the horrible tragedy where they're talking about reopening it. So I actually got in the Wonder Van and drove over there to Benton Harbor, and it was a pretty intense meeting. There were about 300 people there. Most of the speakers, 4 out of 5 roughly of the speakers, opposed the restart, which is interesting, although it seemed like from applause and stuff that the audience was actually split about 50-50. So the doors opened at this meeting at 6 p.m. and NRC took up the first hour of the program with their stuff, which they always do, and then they gave speakers 2 minutes to speak, and they cut the meeting off at 8:30, even though there were still a lot of people signed up to speak. And their excuse was, we only have the room for so long, but it was clear that most of the people who hadn't spoken yet were also opposed, so that might have had something to do with the decision to cut off the speakers at 8:30. But it was an interesting experience, very inspiring to hear so many people talking about how we need to not restart this plant. And before it opened, I met a nice journalist, and we had a little bit of a discussion before the thing started. And I was interested in reading their take on the thing afterwards. And the way they covered it was kind of emblematic. It's kind of a big example of what's wrong with journalism today. Because they were very careful to do the whole both sides thing. They had quotes from people who were opposed. They had quotes from the NRC and people who supported it. And, that's what journalists are taught to do, is to come down equally. But the thing is that in order to do that, in order to not look like you're supporting one side or the other, they had to leave out some really essential information. And one little bit of information that they left out of the story was actually what I got up to say. I was able to speak for the 2 minutes there. And I pointed out in my 2 minutes that Holtec, the company that's supposed to be doing this restart, is culturally, it's a uniquely corrupt corporation in the nuclear industry, which is really saying something, because they've been convicted of bribery. They bribed a TVA official a few years back, and from that bribe, they made billions of dollars. And then they were just fined recently in November of 2023. They were fined for unsafe practices at one of the reactors that they're working on. They're decommissioning. And then just in this past January, as we reported, they were fined $5 million for lying to regulators. And so, I asked the question of the NRC guy, and I said, given this history of corruption and lying to regulators, are you going to do anything sort of proactive in this restart process to make sure that Holtec isn't going to lie to you? Because often the fines and the penalties that they get hit with, if you catch them afterwards, are smaller than the profit they made from, being dishonest in the first place. And this was one of those points of little personal satisfaction. The NRC guy kind of changed color. He kind of turned a deeper shade of red, but his only answer was, I expect Holtec to follow the rules.
Because...
Yeah, and I got a little bit...
I expect pigs to fly, too.
I got a little bit emotional, I have to admit. And I was like, how could you reasonably expect that when they have this decades-long history of lying to regulators? And all he did was repeat, I expect Holtec to follow the rules. And that was it. And then they went on to the next speaker. But the story from this journalist I talked to before the whole thing started did not mention that. And if you're someone who's looking for information on how to do this, on whether or not to expect something good from this, or whether or not to trust Holtec, this is the kind of information that needs to be in there. But if you provide that information, it looks like you're taking a side, because clearly, if it's a dishonest corporation, you're picking you're saying honesty is better than dishonesty, which means you're sort of coming down on a side. And this, I want to play a little clip now from some of these were two women who've been living next to the nuclear plant for decades and have, a lot of personal experience with the running of this plant. And one of the things the NRC said was there were never any tritium problems at this plant, at Palisades plant. And listen to what these women who lived next to the plant had to say. I'm just wondering what your general impression of the whole meeting was. What did you think? Were the NRC people listening, or were they just stonewalling?
Well, there was definitely some stonewalling going on there. I mean, it's like just exactly what you were saying about him denying that there were ever higher levels of tritium. We can send them the paperwork, but what good does it do?
They had a tritium leak at the plant, but I was invited by the plant manager with Kevin Camps and some other people to do a tour. And one of the issues was the tritium leak at the plant. And they told us exactly where it was. It was a pipe that had broken or whatever underground, and they were digging it up to repair that pipe. And then they told us that they had made the repairs and there weren't leaks anymore. But for him to make the statement that there had never been tritium issues
That
in
wasn't
that
true.
area,
That was
a lie.
But that wasn't a true
And
statement.
the other thing that I wanted to call them out on was that they were safely operating when they shut down. Well, they shut down early. They shut down, I believe, two or 3 months early. And one of the reasons that was noted in the paper that they shut down early was because they needed to make repairs and they didn't want to spend the money to make the repairs. So to tell us, to stand up there and tell us that this plant was operating safely when they shut down, I question that because the repairs were not made. And I don't believe that the repairs have been made today because they were in decommission mode. And we don't know if they're going to make those repairs because they certainly didn't tell us that tonight, did they?
Okay, so sorry about the sound quality there. It was a very noisy auditorium, but the point is that there were definitely lies told. That they lied about the tritium, and as the woman you heard speaking in that recording was a woman named Betty Pierman, who has been following Palisades for decades, and the point she made at the end there about the when they shut down, the NRC guy who ran the meeting repeatedly said that the plant was in a safe condition when it was shut down. And that is also a lie, because the reason they shut the plant down actually early, they shut it down some weeks early before they were scheduled to, because it turned out there was a leak in the seals around the control rods, okay? Which, you might not think that's a big deal, that just a seal is leaking, but this is what's called a pressurized water reactor. And that means that the pressure on the inside of the reactor is 150 atmospheres. That means more than a ton of pressure for every square inch. And when you have that much pressure, that's an almost unimaginable amount of pressure. When you have that much pressure and you have a leak, those leaks can very quickly change from a little seeping to complete failure. Because if you're at all familiar with leaks, like if you've ever had leaking in your plumbing, and that's only about 40 pounds per square inch, you know that leaks don't get better. They might start out as seeping, but they get worse and worse. They don't just fix themselves. And to have more than a ton of pressure on every square inch inside of this reactor chamber, and then you've got these seals, and they're not made out of metal. The seals are made out of a more flexible material.
So it's kind of like that thing with the crazy submarine that killed those rich people, except we're all in the submarine that they made, effectively.
Right. It's the same idea. There was tons of pressure, more than a ton per square inch coming in. This is more than a ton of pressure pushing out, but it's the same thing. It can go along and then just seem like it's going okay for a while, and then it just fails catastrophically. So again, to report that would make it seem like the issue that, or the venue that they're reporting for was coming down on a side, because you can't say the NRC guy was lying without seeming like you're coming down on a side. And so that is a big problem with our journalism today, is that this idea that
You've got to appear not like you're not taking one side or another often means that you have to leave a lot of the truth out of your reporting.
and that is, especially when it comes to nuclear power, that is an invitation to disaster.
Because there's a stigma attached to lying.
Yeah.
For some reason, yeah.
Yeah.
A lot of discrimination against liars and the known liars in the world.
Well, and rightfully so.
Yes.
So that's what I wanted to report to you folks, and just like I say, most of the speakers were opposed to the restart. There was one fella there who had worked at Palisades for decades, and his point was that Palisades is a unique design. It's not like any other nuclear plant in the country,
Because this was made by a company called Combustion Engineering.
most plants were made by a company called Westinghouse. But he said that operating this reactor is different from operating any other reactor in the world. And yet, part of what the NRC said is that they plan to use what's called a generic environmental impact statement. In other words, they're going to treat this plant as if it were just like all the other plants in the country. So, yeah. So that's kind of how I spent, a good
So what they're
portion of
telling
last
us in
week.
advance, they are in fact going to give us inaccurate information?
Yes.
Okay,
they are.
great,
That's
yeah.
exactly what they're saying. So, all right. Well, we'll see what happens there. It's not a done deal, even though most of the regulators were already acting like it's a done deal, even though the environmental impact statement hasn't even been created. There's been no NEPA hearings, National Environmental Policy Act hearings. But there has been $1.5 billion given to Holtec by the Biden administration already. Although that is just a tiny fraction what they estimate they're going to need to restart this thing. It could be $50 billion that they need, but we'll continue to follow the story, and hopefully it never happens. Anyway, so to go to a lighter note, a more pleasant note, since this is Earth Day, I decided to do an interview with Zeb Albert from the Wood County Park District. And just I have to say that Wood County Park District is in fact one of our sponsors. They do pay for advertising here on For a Green Future, but that had nothing to do with the fact that I interviewed this fella on this topic, because I think it's really interesting that a lot of people are switching over to using native plants and native flowers for their landscaping, and that's a really good thing. So let's go ahead and play that interview. Please share with us your name and who you're with.
Awesome. Thank you. My name is Zeb Albert. I am the stewardship coordinator for the Wood County Park District in Wood County, Ohio. I've been with the parks for about 9.5 years now.
Great. So I asked you on today because we're coming up on the Wood County Park District's annual native plant sale. Where and when is that happening?
All right, so we actually have 2 different sales every year. It's been kind of an expanding thing throughout the years. So we have a big spring sale and then a smaller fall sale. The spring sale, which is the one that's coming up here soon, will be in the Champion Building at the Wood County Fairgrounds in Wood County, Ohio. And there's actually kind of 2 parts to it. So we have Friday, May 3rd from 10 to 1 is our Friends of the Parks members only sale. However, you can sign up to be a member of the Friends group day of on site. And then the main day that's open to everyone will be Saturday, May 4th, also from 10 to 1.
Okay, cool. So all your plants are grown from locally based genomes. What exactly is a locally based genome? What does this mean?
So I'll give a little information about natives just in case your audience doesn't know that to begin with. So a native species, the way that we define them, is a species that evolved in our area as part of that original ecosystem that existed here before human intervention. So they're all part of that same food web. They all get nutrients from one another, shelter from one another. They're all existing together like that. So a local genotype, native, is one that evolved. It's kind of like a way to focus it down a little bit more narrowly. It's one that evolved not only in that kind of general area of the country that makes something a native, but also then geographically closer to your location or in similar conditions to that location where you're wanting to put those plants. So at the Park District, all of our seed actually comes from our parks, as well as our native seed nursery that's at one of our parks. And we hand collect all that seed with our staff and a lot of volunteer help. And then we process that and grow that into the plants that will then be at the sale.
Cool. So how important is it to sort of biodiversity to use a local genome?
So using local genotype plants, it gives them basically just a better chance of surviving in the conditions of a specific area, because you can kind of think of it like a species is one that has a certain genetic structure distinct from other species. The genotype is like little mutations that happen in there that make one species better suited to slightly different conditions in different areas. So it's still the same species, but they're just a little bit better at acclimating to those conditions of that area. So when you're using natives, specifically local genotype natives in an area, that is extremely beneficial to all of the local pollinators and the ecosystem as a whole. Those species are perfectly evolved already, just naturally, to support all the other native species that are in that area. And that's everything, not just the plants. You're talking about all the pollinators, all the other animals that are already there. So using those plants helps to reestablish those ecosystems that may be fragmented already. And it helps to bring back some of that diversity of that wildlife to create a more healthy and stable and resilient ecosystem then.
Okay. So we're all familiar with the problem of invasive species. Isn't gardening and landscaping one of the biggest sources of invasives?
It can be. So to help your audience out, and it's pretty easy to divine what that would be, but an invasive species, as opposed to a native, is one that is not from that specific area. It's been brought in generally by humans for some purpose. And what makes something invasive is that not only will it take over an area, it will outcompete all the species that are supposed to be there. So it's not from the area, but it's also generally an aggressive species that takes over. Many of those have come in because of more traditional landscaping and gardening practices, but it doesn't necessarily have to be that way. There's a lot of invasive species that have been traditionally used because of their aesthetics for humans. We tend to cater things so that they look nice to us, but that doesn't necessarily mean that they look good or have any benefits for nature. So actually at the Park District, at Wood County Park District here, we started a project years ago, before I even started here, called the Native Plant Project, which the entire intent of is to promote and showcase all of those local genotype native species from our area, because a lot of people don't know that they even exist. Many of them are very beautiful species. They can look great in a landscape or a garden setting. And not only that, but they also provide crucial ecological benefits, such as many of them are host plants for different species of pollinators. Everybody, I think, is probably familiar with the monarch butterfly and how it requires milkweed species not only for food, but also as a place to lay their eggs. And we've tried to incorporate those natives into our own landscaping and garden areas at the parks to kind of showcase that these species not only can look good, but can fill those gaps in the ecosystem that we've created. So,
Is it more difficult to grow native species? Do they require a lot of tender, loving care?
It's an interesting question. So, as I mentioned before, we actually collect all of our seed ourselves by hand and with volunteer help, massive amounts of volunteer help. From there, that seed goes into our greenhouse then, where we grow it. So, as with any plant, when they're babies, they do require a little bit of TLC. They're pretty tender and a little fragile. But the interesting thing with native species is because they evolved in the ecosystem here, once they get established in an area, they tend to last for a long time. There's a really cool poster that we have here at our shop that shows the root structures of some different native species in comparison to more standard things that you see out there, like your regular old turf grass that you would have in a lawn, say. And one of the interesting things for me when I started in this field was when I saw that poster, I didn't realize the scale that it was describing. And when I looked at it up close, it was not in inches, as I was assuming, but it was in feet. Some of these native species can have root systems that go down 10, 12 feet into the ground once they're established.
Wow.
So it's incredible. It's incredible. So there's many benefits to that. Erosion control is one. Of course, all those roots going down into the ground will help keep that soil held together. Whereas your turf grass seed, those roots from turf grass only go down a couple inches into the ground, which is why when you're in a drought condition, the grass is one of the first things that begins to go dormant and become yellow. And it requires much more watering because of that. Whereas with the native species, once they're good and established, those roots can go down so deep they can reach the deeper waters under the soil, and they don't require much watering, if any, at that point. Another cool thing about the native species is most of them, not all, are perennials. So as long as the health of the plants themselves are maintained, they will keep coming back out of the ground year to year. So you tend to not need to do as much replanting with them as you would with other invasive species or non-native species. So like I said, when they're babies, they do require a little bit of help. If you're first putting natives into the ground, they will require some watering that first year while they're establishing those deep roots. But generally after that first year, they're good to go, and they'll last for a long time.
Cool. Yeah. Well, I have some Coreopsis that I bought from you folks, I think it was about 6 years ago now.
Okay.
They come up every year. Yeah, and the bees love them.
That's excellent.
Yeah.
Is it the tall Coreopsis or the lance leaf Coreopsis? It's a lot shorter.
It's about knee high.
Knee high. That'd probably be our lance leaf Coreopsis. That's a really nice little plant. I love that one.
Mm-hmm. Okay, so how long has the Park District been doing this sale? And do you think it's having a positive effect on biodiversity?
Yes. I have only been here since 2014, so I was just trying to think about this the other day because we're doing a history project at work, and I found out that we started having our sale back in 2001. So it's been ongoing annually for quite a long time now. It started out, like most things would, as a pretty small sale. but it's been slowly gaining more momentum over the years. So back in, I think it was about 2019 or thereabouts, we had been holding sale at some of our properties, some of the Wood County Park District properties, but we ended up outgrowing it then. I remember waiting for the doors to open for the sale that year. There was a line stretching the entire length of the building, and the entire parking lot was completely full. So we reevaluated after that and decided that we were going to move it to the Wood County Fairgrounds so that we had more space for parking and also space to spread the plants out in the building. And it's really taken off. It has really taken off. There's so much interest in it. It's very encouraging for us to see, being in our field and doing what we do, that year to year now, people are coming in droves to buy native species specifically. So it makes us very happy. It absolutely is having a positive effect on biodiversity in the areas that we've restored within our parks, because that's another thing that we use the seed that we collect for, is actually restoring areas within our parks to a more natural state. That's the woodlots and the prairie areas and wetland areas. And we've definitely seen a marked increase in the diversity of species and the number of species within those areas, not only pollinators, but other animals as well. Like it's the foundation of that ecosystem, and life tends to return once those native plants are put back into those areas. Got a really cool example of it that I like to tell people, get excited about it. Here at our shop, which is Ruthinger Memorial Preserve in Perrysburg, Ohio. That's our native seed nursery and greenhouse location. We have a wetland that we installed. It was farm field back in 2018 and before, and we decided that we were going to convert that to a wetland instead. Back then, we got the seed, put the seed down in the winter in 2020, right before the pandemic started. We were out there spreading the seed, and just a year or two later, all the plants were starting to come up in that wetland. It was starting to return to a more natural state. And I happened to be out there just inspecting things. I believe it was in August, and the monarch butterflies were everywhere. It was stunning. I've never seen that many monarchs before, and I was surprised because normally when I'm thinking of monarchs, I'm thinking of milkweed. And at that time of the year, the milkweed was no longer in bloom. But the whole wetland was covered in tall sunflower. And the monarchs, my guess is that they were stopping by on their trip south to go down to Mexico. And they were stopping for a food source, and they were absolutely everywhere. Looking out across the 20, 30 acres of wetland, you could just see like the air almost shimmering because there were so many of them, and it made me giddy. I went and got my coworkers and brought them back there to show them, and we took all kinds of photos of it. It was absolutely incredible and very rewarding to see that something that we had done had that kind of an impact.
Wow, that's wonderful. I might try to get out there and check it out this fall, maybe.
Absolutely.
Yeah, because that's the kind of site that used to be, that kind of abundance used to be pretty common before all our ecosystems were disrupted by invasives and impacts like that.
Development and sure. Yes,
so,
exactly.
All right. Well, we're just about out of time here. So is there anything you'd like to add?
We do a huge amount of volunteer work here, as I've mentioned. We have different opportunities for volunteering throughout the year. So if you happen to be in the area, we have programs for seed collection, seed cleaning, helping out with transplanting plants in the greenhouse. We have nursery beds that people can adopt to take care of, plant gardens, including a new one here at our nursery that we're in the process of constructing right now. And if you're curious about any of our parks or volunteering with us, our website is wcparks.org. So it's plural, wcparks with an s.org. And I just want to thank everybody for listening and for your interest in this topic. It's really important to us that we get the word out about native species and their importance to the ecosystem. So,
All right. And so now let's transition from our interview with the people at Wood Park County Park District to an ad by the Wood County Park District.
For a Green Future is also brought to you by the Wood County Park District. The Wood County Park District is a natural resources conservation agency. They protect natural spaces, maintain quality green spaces, provide engaging programming, and they teach people to love and respect nature. They also restore wildlife habitats and lead people on outdoor adventures. Wood County Parks protects natural spaces in Wood County for all to enjoy from 8 a.m. to 30 minutes past sunset every day of the year. There are several ways to get a hold of them and find out what's happening. One is to call them at 419-353-1897. Another is to visit their website, www.wcparks.org. The website again is www.wcparks.org. They are also available on all social media, Instagram, Facebook, Twitter, and many others. Just search for WC Parks. That's the Wood County Park District, and we're very grateful for their support.
Okay, and we are also grateful to the support of our patrons. And our patrons are fantastic people who went to patreon.com. That's Patreon. There they searched for a Green Future. Up came our Patreon page. Then using their own credit card or debit card, they signed up for a monthly donation, which comes out of their account, comes over to us at a rate that they could afford, since you get to choose how much or how little you'd like to donate. And every little bit helps a lot here at For a Green Future. So please consider going to patreon.com and becoming a patron yourself. Okay, Rebecca, now it's your turn. What have we got?
Okay, well, there is a dizzying array, it turns out, of things that you can make jelly beans out of, but the ones with the funniest sounding name was carnauba wax or carnauba wax. We're not really sure.
Okay.
So, yeah, also called Brazil wax or palm wax. And it is a wax that comes from the leaves of the carnauba plant, which is called Capornicea prunifera, and is native to and only grown in northeastern Brazil in the states of, let's say, Ceará, Piauí. Not really sure there. That don't have really great Portuguese, but yeah, Paraíba, Pernambuco, Rio Grande do Norte, Maranhão, and Bahia states. So, yeah, northeastern Brazil. And it's referred to as the queen of waxes. People really like it a lot because it's really, really shiny. You can make it really shiny, and it has a high melting point, which is important because,
You don't want your jelly beans melting in your hand.
No, nobody likes that. Nobody.
Okay.
Yeah. So it's made by collecting the leaves, drying them, beating them to loosen the wax, and then refining and bleaching it, which sounds a little concerning, but I guess humans have been doing it for a while. And it's also known in the trade, in the food additives trade, as E903. Apparently, food additives have numbers, and that's the one for carnauba wax. Disturbingly and interestingly, it's also used in auto wax. There goes your high melting point. Shoe polish, dental floss, food waxes and polishes, including shoes and furniture. And the paper coatings, surfboards, speedboats for a while. People were using it on speedboats.
Instrument polishes for musical instruments.
Makeup, skincare, and it's good for smoking pipe polishes. The good thing about that is that instead of flaking off like some waxes, it just kind of sort of dulls if you don't buff it until you add some more. So that just doesn't. You don't want stuff flaking off of your pipe. That's no good. So
No, and it's hard to look distinguished when you've got flakes of stuff falling off that pipe there.
Yes, it is. Yeah, I believe it has to be mostly mixed with other waxes,
Hmm.
but
It's good. It's very good for at what it does. A few environmental issues. It is cause monoculture linked to deforestation, biodiversity loss, and droughts, and also poor working conditions and pay for the workers. This is because people like to grow it in the rainforest, and when you cut down rainforest, it's really lush and fertile, great. You grow stuff like crazy for what, like 3-4 years?
Mm-hmm.
And then it loses fertility, dries up, and blows away, becomes a desert.
Right. Yeah.
Because in a rainforest, all of the biomass, all of the good stuff, all the nutrients are up in the canopy. So, yeah, it's really never good to clear cut stuff to grow things in what used to be a rainforest. So, yeah, removing too many of the trees, like if you remove 10 or 20 at a time, as people are doing, because they want to make money fast, because they only have a minute before their rainforest soil dries up and blows away, will kill the tree and also affect, or shorten its life, and also affect plants that are dependent on the palm tree. It also harbors a parasite which gives workers Chagas disease.
Ooh, that's not a good one.
No, yeah, it didn't sound good. And then to combat that, they're trying to increase the use of pesticides, which is also bad. But it is apparently more sustainable than most other waxes. But you just need to keep an eye on the growers to make sure they're doing things okay. Some of them will want to make quick money fast because people want to do that.
Okay. Well, so if you're someone who celebrates National Jelly Bean Day tomorrow,
Yeah.
Think about the wax that you're about to.
There you
to get
go.
there. Okay.
I don't know. it's a little ambivalent. Do eat jelly beans? Don't. You're probably going to eat them anyway. Who can resist jelly beans?
Yeah, especially when there's an excuse to buy some.
Totally, yeah.
All right, and just, we're not receiving any funds from the jelly bean industry. I just want to be clear on that. All right, well, thank you, Rebecca. And now on to ecological news. And we're going to start this week with the feel-good story we didn't have time to get to last week. And this was from Wired magazine. It originally was published March 22nd. And the title was, "Brace Yourself for the Comeback of Citizen Scientists." And it's an article about how basically, as governments are failing in their responsibility to protect people from environmental harm, more and more often citizens are just stepping up and doing it themselves. And they start out with a story about a fella who lives in Yorkshire, England, next to the Ilkley River, and they were having problems there because fishermen were starting to pull up. Instead of catching fish, they were catching wet wipes and condoms, and there were lots of dead fish.
Oh dear. And
it turns out that the government had privatized the sewage treatment plant.
Oh joy.
And the UK's version of the EPA, called the EA, basically had no money to enforce the country's laws on pollution levels, and so the Ilkley Clean River Group was formed, and they created their own testing regimen using research that they found online on how to do it, and they discovered that E. coli was in the river at 40 times the permissible level. And this is a river that everybody regularly swam in. And so they were going, thanks to the privatization of this plant and the lack of enforcement, they were heading right back to pollution levels from the 1940s and 50s. So that resulted in fines and cleanup. And so that was a feel-good story. They also, in this article, talk about what's happening over in Japan, where the Japanese government, after the Fukushima disaster, kept making these sweeping statements like there's been no increase in radiation detected or countrywide, but they were basing that on literally for the whole country, like taking measurements in 1 or 2 places. And so a citizens group called SafeCast was formed, And they have people all over Japan who take Geiger counters out and take measurements that they update constantly. And so Safecast now provides that information free of charge to anybody who wants to look it up on the internet. And yes, there has been increases in radiation. So, which, only makes sense when you dump radiation into the environment, that radiation levels would increase. But they had to do it themselves. And this is a larger pattern because the prices for the testing equipment, things like Geiger counters and things that can measure pollution levels in water, those prices have been steadily falling. So it's been getting cheaper to do it, and it's been getting easier to learn how to do it because of information available on the internet. And so it's something that is a good thing that's happening more and more these days. Although it would be even better if the governments would just step up and do their job, but at least people are doing it. So consider yourself maybe getting yourself a Geiger counter or something like that, and do some measurements yourself. Okay, next story. This is a much less pleasant story. And this is a story that was in Vox on April 15th. And frankly, this is the story that all the mainstream media should have been covering in terms of court, in terms of legal stuff going on, rather than speculating on whether or not one of the defendants in a criminal trial drooling while they're sleeping is going to affect the jury or not. The Supreme Court has, the title of the story on April 15th is Supreme Court Effectively Abolishes the Right to Mass Protest in 3 U.S. States. And what happened was 3 states, Louisiana, Mississippi, and Texas, passed laws that made anybody who organizes a protest liable for any damage or any criminal action that happens during the protest. Whether or not they encourage it, whether or not, even whether or not it's their side that is breaking the law.
Oh my God.
So one of the dissenting judges pointed out that let's say a group protesting racial inequality calls for a protest, the Ku Klux Klan could show up and start throwing rocks and breaking windows, and the people who called the initial protest would be the ones who would get arrested and penalized for this breaking of the law. And this really kind of makes me feel like being back in the old Soviet Union, where any kind of protest is met with getting arrested, with getting persecuted. And America was built on protest. Protest is a very American thing to do. I mean, think about the Boston Tea Party. We essentially, one of the first things we started doing as the United States, as a separate country from England, were protests. And this thing can, just to give you an idea of how repressive this is, I was in one of the Black Lives Matter protests. I didn't help organize it. I was just one of the people in there. It started at the county courthouse and went over to a county park to hear some speakers. And in the process, there were about 600-700 people there at Bowling Green. In the process, we were crossing Main Street there, and we crossed against the light because, you've got 700 people lined up at an intersection. You're not going to stop, wait for the walk sign and have the crowd divided up into 15 different groups trying to cross the street. And that specifically is considered a terrorist act by these state laws. And so basically just jaywalking means that whoever called for the protest would get thrown in jail. So that is a terrible, terrible thing, because often, as with House Bill 6, the reason we got the attention of the law enforcement agencies was that we held protests all over Ohio. I helped organize them, and Ohio Citizen Action helped organize them. They were very peaceful protests. We had bullhorns. We didn't block any traffic. But had we not called attention to House Bill 6, law enforcement would never have looked at it because it was just quote unquote business as usual. they wouldn't have caught the guys who were given $65 million in bribes to push it through the state legislature, and we would still have House Bill 6 today. So this really is a blow against democracy itself. It's not just a blow against protests, it's a blow against democracy. So that was a horrible, horrible thing. And the reason what happened is these laws got appealed to the Supreme Court, and the Supreme Court said, we're not going to hear those appeals. So in other words, the laws remain on the books, and it is now illegal to protest in Mississippi, Louisiana, or Texas. Okay, next. TortoiseMedia.com, a story April 16th. Russia is earning billions selling nuclear fuel to the West. It's a story by Connor O'Brien. And basically, even though we've said we don't want to support Putin and his war in the Ukraine, since the start of the war, nuclear exports from Russia to the West have doubled. Specifically, about a third of those go to the United States and France. The imports increased from 1.6 billion to 3.1 billion. One interesting thing is that they are one of the only countries in the world that makes the HALEU fuel, the high assay low enriched uranium fuel that Bill Gates needs for his natrium reactor. And one of the reasons they can do that is because they don't really enforce environmental laws in Russia. And so they can make this really dirty fuel that causes lots of contamination, and who's going to stop them? You can't. Yeah. So essentially, what happened in Russia after the fall of the Soviet Union was they established sort of oligarchs that like run everything, and one of the things they do is make this HALEU fuel. And one of the countries that's helping export Russian uranium around the world is Kazakhstan, because Kazakhstan's purchases of irradiated fuel from Russia went up from $330,000 worth at the start of the war to now they're buying $174 million worth. And the thing is, Kazakhstan doesn't actually have any nuclear reactors. So they have no reason to buy this fuel themselves. So what they're doing is they're buying the Russian fuel and then selling it to the Western countries like the US and France. So basically, nukes are helping Putin. So that's the main point of that story. Okay, now on to a new segment, and we don't have a whole lot of time for it, but I'm calling this the meme busting statement, because there's a lot of anti-environmental memes going around that, you just see this thing on the internet, on social media, and it's wrong, it's false, but explaining why it's false takes up a lot of time in the comment section, and nobody reads the comment section anyway. So I just wanted to counter some of them with this media that we've got here. So one is, there's a meme going around that shows a electric bike connected to a charger, and then that charger is connected by wires back to like a coal plant that's belching out smoke. And the title on this meme is The Great Delusion. So suggesting that electric bikes and electric cars are just an illusion, that they're not really helping the environment. Well, of course they are helping the environment, really. In reality, last year, or 2022, EVs and electric bikes and little electric scooters avoided 1.5 million barrels of oil every single day of the year. Now, most of that was the bikes, the small micro vehicles. They saved 1 million gallons of oil every day, and the electric cars saved 0.5 million, 500,000 barrels of oil every day. It's not enough. We use about 85 million barrels of oil a day. So it's like 1/85th of what we need to do. But at least it started, and it's growing, and it's moving in the right direction. And so to derail that with a meme is kind of evil. And a second meme that I want to talk about that has the same purpose, is discouraging people from buying electric cars or electric vehicles. There's a meme that shows a child laborer, a kid about 8 years old, and he's got a basket of soil on his head that's obviously from mining. And the caption on this meme is, "This is where your electric car comes from." And what that's referring to is in the Democratic Republic of Congo, that's where we get 70% of our cobalt. Most electric car batteries use some cobalt. There's about 250,000 cobalt miners in the DRC. About 40,000 of that 250,000 are children. And so that is a terrible thing, and that is true. But we use child labor on a whole slew of things. There's child labor in the textile industry, child labor in the agricultural industry. In fact, most child labor, 71% of child labor, is in agriculture right now.
We use it in the chocolate factory. So every time you use chocolate or eat chocolate, you're depending on child labor. And the answer to that, the answer to stopping child labor, is not to stop using electric cars. The answer is to change supply chain regulations so that you don't buy stuff that's produced by child labor. And in fact, Germany has just last year passed a law doing that, and it's had some success already in reducing the amount of child labor that produces stuff used and purchased in Germany. And we need to follow that. We don't need to stop making electric cars and electric vehicles. All right, so now there's another meme that I actually want to confirm, and that is a meme that is entitled Ridiculous Republican Laws. And it lists off a whole bunch of laws introduced in the House of Representatives. One is the Hands Off Our Home Appliances Act. Another is Liberty in Laundry Act. Another is the Clothes Dryers Reliability Act.
Liberty in laundry?
Yeah, I know. Liberty and laundry did not go together. Whenever I'm doing laundry, I'm not thinking, I'm free.
Yeah. No, not really.
No. But what all these laws do is try to remove regulations that say that these appliances have to have a certain minimum amount of efficiency. So in other words, the Republicans who are pushing all these bills want you to have to pay lots of money to buy big, inefficient appliances, so you have to pay bigger electric bills, which makes the people that make donations to them very happy. All right. Well, that's it for this week. Wow. This zipped right by. Thanks so much for listening. We'll be back next week. This is Joe DeMare.
And Rebecca Wood.
And we are signing off.
Sun done give us all we need to make this country run. But that nuclear power's got us fussing and fighting, and I do believe it's time we was done. No nukes!